The sun was dipping low over the hills of Perea when a quiet knock echoed at the doorway. Jesus had been teaching the disciples, his voice calm, steady, full of life, when suddenly a breathless messenger stepped forward. Dust clung to his robe, and his eyes carried a fear that spoke louder than his words. "Lord," he gasped, "the one you love is sick." Lazarus of Bethany. The entire room fell silent. Lazarus wasn't just another follower. He was family, someone whose home Jesus had visited countless times. Martha's warmth, Mary's devotion, Lazarus' kindness. It was a place where Jesus rested, laughed, and found comfort far from the crowds. But the message carried weight. A sickness so severe that Mary and Martha believed only one hope remained: Jesus himself. The disciples exchanged anxious looks. They knew Bethany was dangerously close to Jerusalem, where the religious leaders had already tried to seize Jesus. Going back could mean walking straight into death. But Jesus didn't rise. He didn't rush. Instead, he looked at the messenger with a calmness that felt impossible in the moment. "This sickness," he said slowly, "will not end in death. It is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." The disciples were confused. If he loved Lazarus, why wait? But Jesus' face remained peaceful, almost knowing, as if he could see a timeline they couldn't. As if he knew that what looked like a tragedy was actually a stage being set for something far greater. Hours passed, then a whole day. The disciples expected Jesus to change his mind, to hurry toward Bethany. But he didn't. Not yet. On the second day, Jesus finally stood. His decision was firm, carved into stone. "Let us go back to Judea." The disciples panicked. "Rabbi," they protested, "the Jews tried to stone you the last time you were there." Jesus looked at them with a depth only he carried. "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the day does not stumble." Then his voice softened. "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I am going there to wake him." The disciples didn't understand yet, but they were about to witness a miracle so powerful, so earth-shaking, that it would echo through every generation. A journey toward grief. The road to Bethany was long, winding, and heavy with unspoken tension. Dust rose beneath their sandals as Jesus and his disciples walked, each step pulling them closer to danger and closer to a heartbreak waiting in silence. The disciples followed, but their minds were uneasy. They whispered among themselves, wrestling with fear. Why return to a place where enemies waited? Why risk everything for a man who, by now, might already be gone? Jesus walked ahead with purpose. His pace was steady, his eyes fixed on a destination none of them could yet understand. There was no hesitation, no fear, only a quiet determination. It was as if he carried within him a truth too deep for words, a power untouched by death. Hours passed, villages faded behind them. The closer they came to Bethany, the heavier the atmosphere grew. Even the wind seemed to slow, carrying a stillness that felt almost sacred. When they reached the outskirts of Bethany, the news hit like a blow. A woman stood outside a small house, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers. When she saw Jesus and his disciples, she whispered softly, "Lazarus has been dead for days." 4 days. The number echoed in the disciples' minds like thunder. In Jewish tradition, for days meant there was no doubt, no chance of misdiagnosis, no hope of revival. The spirit was believed to have fully departed. Lazarus wasn't just gone, he was gone beyond human reach. A wave of grief washed over the group, but Jesus' expression didn't crumble. Instead, a deeper sadness filled his eyes, an ache not rooted in fear, but in compassion for the pain he knew he was walking into. As they approached the village, people recognized Jesus and began whispering. Some mourners turned their tear-stained faces toward him, confused. Others had questions written in their eyes. If he loved Lazarus so much, why did he come so late? But before anyone could confront him, Martha appeared at the edge of the path. She wasn't running. She wasn't shouting. She walked slowly, each step pulled by sorrow. But her face was steady strong, even in heartbreak. When she reached Jesus, her voice cracked but didn't break. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." A single sentence, heavy, honest, human, and yet, underneath her pain, there was still a flicker of faith. Something. Jesus was about to kindle into a flame that would change. The promise stronger than death. Martha stood before Jesus, her eyes red from weeping, her voice trembling under the weight of 4 days of grief. Yet even in her sorrow, there was a quiet strength, a belief fighting to survive beneath the pain. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." The words hung in the air like a wound left open. The disciples lowered their heads. The mourners behind her fell silent. But Jesus looked at Martha with a tenderness that softened the very atmosphere around them. "Your brother will rise again," he said gently. Martha nodded, but her voice carried resignation, not hope. "I know he will rise." In the resurrection at the last day, she believed in the promise of the future. But what she could not see was the miracle standing right in front of her. The power not bound by time, not limited by death. Jesus took a step closer. "Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? His words were not a lesson. They were an invitation into a truth bigger than grief, bigger than loss, bigger than the grave itself. Martha's breath shook. She felt the weight of his presence, the authority in his voice, something far beyond human assurance. And suddenly, her sorrow met a glimpse of divine power. "Yes, Lord," she whispered, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Her declaration was not small. It was a confession forged in heartbreak of faith that refused to collapse under tragedy. Then Martha turned and hurried back toward the house. She needed to call her sister. Mary had to know Jesus was here. Inside the home, mourners surrounded Mary, offering comfort as she wept. But when Martha whispered in her ear, "The teacher is here, and he's asking for you," Mary's tears changed. Her grief didn't disappear, but hope sparked. She rose quickly. The mourners followed her, thinking she was heading to the tomb to cry again. But Mary wasn't running toward death. She was running toward the one who held power over it. And with every step she took, the tension rose, because her encounter with Jesus would open the next chapter of the miracle about to unfold. When Mary fell at his feet, Mary's footsteps pounded against the rocky path as she rushed out of the house. Grief pushed her forward, but hope small. Trembling, desperate pulled her even faster. The mourners followed behind her in confusion, whispering, trying to understand what had changed so suddenly. When Mary finally saw Jesus standing at the edge of the village, she didn't slow down. She didn't pause to gather herself. She fell straight to the ground at his feet, as if her heart had been carrying this moment since the day Lazarus breathed his last. "Lord," her voice broke, shattered by days of mourning, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." The same words Martha had spoken, but Mary's were soaked in raw, unfiltered pain. Her tears hit the dust at his feet like rain on parched earth. The mourners around her began to weep as well, their sorrow rising like a tide that pulled everyone in. And Jesus watched it all. He saw Mary's shaking shoulders. He heard the cry hidden beneath her words. He felt the crushing sorrow in the air. But what moved him wasn't just grief, it was love. A love so deep that he didn't stand untouched by their pain. Scripture says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. His heart didn't remain distant. He stepped into their suffering. "Where have you laid him?" Jesus asked. "Lord, come and see," they replied. They began walking toward the tomb. Mary leaned on Martha. The mourners followed. The disciples walked silently, confused but watching Jesus closely. Something in him had shifted, not doubt, not fear, but a divine ache. And then, as they moved closer to the place of death, something astonishing happened. Jesus wept, not the soft, polite tears of a distant onlooker. He wept with the family he loved. God in flesh stood beside a tomb and let his tears fall. It shocked everyone. Some whispered, "See how he loved him." Others questioned, if he opened the eyes of the blind, couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? The tension thickened. Pain wrestled with hope in every heart present. And the tomb stood a header, silent stone guarding a story everyone believed was already over. But Jesus' tears weren't a sign of defeat. They were the calm before a miracle the world had never. Standing before the sealed tomb, the path narrowed as they approached the place where Lazarus had been laid. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the shadow of death lingered over every stone. The mourners slowed. Even the disciples felt a quiet dread settle inside them. For days, the finality of that number echoed in everyone's mind. The tomb came into view, a small cave carved into the hillside, sealed with a round stone pressed tightly against its entrance. The stone wasn't just a barrier, it was a statement, a declaration that life had ended, that nothing more could be done. Mary's grip tightened on Martha's arm. The mourners wept softly. Some covered their faces. Others couldn't bear to look at the tomb at all. But Jesus walked forward with steady steps, stopping only a few feet from the massive stone. His eyes didn't show hesitation. They showed authority, a quiet confidence that unsettled even those who believed in him. Then Jesus said the unthinkable, "Remove the stone." A shock rippled through the crowd. Martha stepped forward immediately, fear rushing through her voice. "Lord, by now there will be a stench. It has been for days." Her words weren't doubt. They were human logic trying to protect him from the reality of death, trying to shield her own heart from more pain. Jesus turned to her, his voice gentle but firm. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" The moment froze. Martha's breath trembled. The disciples exchanged uncertain glances. The mourners whispered in fear. No one moved at first. Then, slowly, the men standing near the tomb stepped toward the stone. Their hands shook as they pressed against its rough surface. Muscles strained. Dust rose. The grinding sound of stone against earth filled the air. Inch by inch, the entrance opened. The smell of death drifted out heavy, undeniable. Mary covered her face. Some mourners turned away. The disciples swallowed hard. But Jesus didn't move. He lifted his eyes toward heaven, the tomb now fully open, the crowd holding its breath behind him. His voice rose not loud, but full of a power that reached far beyond that hillside. Everything was leading to this moment. Life was about to speak into death, and the impossible was about to step in. The prayer before the miracle. The stone had been rolled away. The entrance of the tomb yawned open like a silent wound in the earth. The crowd stood frozen, some in fear, some in confusion, all in anticipation. The cold air that drifted out carried the unmistakable weight of death. No one could pretend Lazarus was merely sleeping. But Jesus didn't flinch. He stepped forward, standing face to face with the darkness inside the tomb. The mourners watched, trembling. The disciples held their breath. Mary and Martha clung to each other, their tears mixing with a faint, impossible hope. And then Jesus did something unexpected. He lifted his eyes upward. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." His voice cut through the tension like a ray of light in a storm. This wasn't a desperate cry. It wasn't a request born from uncertainty. His words carried confidence, certainty, as if the miracle was already guaranteed. "I knew that you always hear me," he continued, "but I said this for the sake of the people standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." Every eye was locked on him. Even the whispering stopped. His prayer wasn't long, dramatic, or emotional. It was simple, direct, full of authority. It revealed something deeper than anyone had imagined. This moment was not just about Lazarus. It was about revealing who Jesus truly was. The one with power over sickness. The one with power over time. The one with power over death itself. Inside the tomb, silence swallowed everything. No movement, no sound, only darkness and the finality of 4 days in the grave. Jesus lowered his gaze from heaven to the tomb. The atmosphere tightened. Even the wind seemed to pause. He took a single step forward. The disciples felt their hearts pound. Mary covered her mouth. Martha's eyes widened, tears slipping down her cheeks. The crowd leaned in, their fear wrestling with awe. Then Jesus' voice rang out across the hillside, clear, commanding, thunderous in authority. "Lazarus, come out." The words reverberated against the stone walls, echoing deep into the tomb. They weren't a plea. They weren't a whisper. They were a command spoken by the one who created life itself. And in the stillness that followed, the world seemed to stop. Something was moving in the darkness. Something impossible. Something alive. When the dead man moved, the echo of Jesus' command, "Lazarus, come out," hung in the air like a lightning strike frozen in time. No one breathed. No one blinked. Even the birds seemed to fall silent, as if creation itself paused to witness what would happen next. Mary felt her heart stop. Martha clutched her robe with trembling fingers. The disciples stared into the darkness of the tomb, their minds unable to comprehend what Jesus had just ordered. 4 days, a sealed tomb, a body already surrendered to decay, and yet a sound stirred in the blackness. At first, it was faint, a soft shuffle, the scrape of fabric against stone, a whisper of movement where only stillness should exist. Someone gasped. Several mourners stepped back in fear. Others pressed forward, eyes wide, unable to look away. Then clearer this time the slow, dragging steps echoed toward the entrance. A shadow shifted in the tomb's mouth. Another gasp. Someone cried out. Mary's hands flew to her face. Martha staggered forward, unable to believe her own eyes. And then he appeared. Lazarus, alive. He stepped into the light, his body still wrapped in burial cloth from head to toe. Strips of linen hung around his arms and legs. His face was covered with a cloth that fluttered slightly with each new breath, the breath of a man who had been dead. The crowd erupted. Some fell to their knees. Others screamed. A few stumbled backward, overwhelmed with awe and fear. The disciples stood frozen, their minds torn between shock and worship. Mary collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, not with grief now, but with joy too big for words. Martha pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming as she whispered her brother's name over and over. Jesus alone remained calm. A quiet, knowing peace rested on his face, not pride, not surprise, but the steady confidence of one who had just reminded the world who commands life. Then he spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. Unbind him and let him go. The mourners rushed forward, hands shaking as they peeled away the burial cloth. Layer by layer, the bindings fell from Lazarus' body, and beneath them emerged a man fully alive, eyes open, chest rising with breath, skin warm with life returned. The impossible stood before them. The dead man lived again, and the glory of God shone brighter than ever. The shock that swept through Bethany, words spread faster than footsteps could carry it. Before the burial cloth had even finished falling from Lazarus' body, people were already running through the narrow streets, past stone houses, past market stalls, shouting the news that no one could believe. Lazarus is alive. Jesus raised him from the dead. Bethany burst into chaos. Doors swung open. Families left their meals unfinished. Children clung to their mothers' robes. Neighbors rushed toward the tomb, drawn by a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief. Back at the hillside, Lazarus stood surrounded by trembling hands and stunned faces. His sisters held on to him as though he might disappear again if they blinked. Mary's tears soaked his shoulder. Martha kept touching his arms, his face, his hands confirming over and over that this wasn't a dream, not a vision, not a hallucination. It was real. Lazarus was breathing. Some of the mourners began praising God aloud, their voices rising like a wave that swept the whole crowd. Others could only stand in stunned silence, unable to speak. And a few fled in fear, unable to face the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The disciples stood close to Jesus, their hearts pounding. They had seen him calm storms, heal the sick, cast out demons, but this shattered every category, every limit, every definition of what they thought was possible. Peter whispered, "He commands death, and death listens. Jesus remained quiet, his expression filled not with triumph, but with compassion. He looked at Lazarus with a gentle smile of relief and divine purpose all woven together. This miracle wasn't about spectacle. It wasn't about fame. It was a revelation, a declaration to the world. Life stands in front of you. Hope walks among you. The resurrection is not an event. It is a person, but not everyone saw it that way. While many rejoiced, a few slipped away from the crowd, heading straight toward Jerusalem. Their footsteps were quick, their faces troubled. They intended to tell the Pharisees everything not out of praise, but out of alarm. And so, as Bethany erupted in faith, Jerusalem braced for fear. Because this miracle would not only change Lazarus' life, it would ignite a chain reaction that would lead Jesus toward the greatest sacrifice the world would ever know. The miracle that threatened the powerful. While Bethany overflowed with joy, another storm was rising, quiet, dangerous, and fueled by fear. The men who had fled the tomb reached Jerusalem by nightfall, their robes dusty, their breaths sharp as they burst into the courtyard of the Pharisees. "We saw it with our own eyes," one of them said. Lazarus, dead for days, walked out of his tomb when Jesus called him. The words struck like a spark in dry wood. The Pharisees exchanged dark looks. Some were stunned, some furious, others frightened. Miracles they could ignore, teachings they could debate, crowds they could challenge. But raising the dead? That shattered every argument they had left. It meant something they refused to accept. Jesus wasn't just a teacher, wasn't just a healer, wasn't just a prophet. His power was beyond human, uncontainable, uncontrollable, and that terrified them. A council meeting was called immediately. High priests, elders, scholars, men of influence and authority gathered behind closed doors. Their voices rose and clashed like swords in the air. "If we let him continue," one argued, "everyone will believe in him. The Romans will see this as rebellion," another said. "They'll destroy our temple and our nation." Fear twisted logic. Anxiety overshadowed truth. Their concern wasn't for the people. It was for their own power, their own position, their own control. And then Caiaphas, the high priest, stood. "You know nothing," he declared. "It is better that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." A chilling silence fell. The decision was made. Jesus must be stopped. Not because he committed a crime, not because he posed a political threat, but because he raised a dead man, and the world was beginning to believe. Meanwhile, in Bethany, Jesus remained with Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. The house that had once echoed with mourning now overflowed with life, laughter, and gratitude. People came from neighboring towns just to see Lazarus and hear the story. And with every witness, with every testimony, the truth spread wider. Death itself had bowed before Jesus. But Jesus knew what the Pharisees had decided. He knew where this miracle would lead him. He knew the cross was now closer than ever. Yet he didn't run. He didn't hide. He continued his mission, one step at a time, toward the greatest victory the world would ever witness. Victory that echoed beyond the grave. Bethany glowed with a kind of joy the village had never known. Families gathered outside the home of Lazarus day after day, whispering in awe, pointing with trembling hands as the once dead man walked among them, laughing. eating, speaking, living. Children stared at him with wide eyes. Elders shook their heads in disbelief. Travelers passing by altered their routes just to witness the miracle with their own eyes. Lazarus had become a living testimony, breathing proof that death was not the final word. And in the center of it all stood Jesus, not seeking attention, not absorbing praise, but quietly comforting, teaching, and preparing those who followed him for what was coming next. Mary often sat at his feet, listening with renewed devotion. Martha moved with a confidence she had never shown before her faith, once shaken by grief, now anchored in unshakable truth. Lazarus himself followed Jesus closely, not out of fear, but out of gratitude born from the very edge of eternity. But even in the celebration, a shadow stretched toward them. The Pharisees had not forgotten. Their decision was firm, and their plans were already in motion. Word reached Bethany that they now sought not only Jesus, but Lazarus as well. A miracle to big threatened a power to fragile. Yet Jesus remained undisturbed. He knew his time was drawing near, not an end, but a beginning. The raising of Lazarus was not just a miracle of compassion. It was a signpost pointing toward his own resurrection, a promise stamped into history. Death would not win, not then, not ever. On a quiet evening, Jesus stood outside the village with his disciples gathered around him. The sky burned, gold as the setting sun cast long shadows across the hills. The breeze carried the soft sounds of Bethany voices, footsteps, laughter that had returned after days of mourning. "Remember this," Jesus told them softly. "I am the resurrection and the life." The disciples listened, their hearts heavy with the weight of his words, yet strengthened by what they had witnessed. He turned toward the road that would soon lead him to Jerusalem, the final stretch of a journey that would change the world forever. Behind him, the miracle of Bethany shone like a beacon that would never fade. Because Lazarus' rising wasn't just the story of a man brought back. It was the story of a Savior who proved life defeats death, light defeats darkness, love defeats the grave, and that victory still echoes today.